sitting here, the hardest problem is arguing, like, isn't it obvious? The hardest problem is convincing people the problem isn't hard at all, but simple. And I really, it's kind of the frustrating part about philosophy. And it illustrates, too, that what's really going on is not an intellectual issue.
Yeah.
It's a spiritual issue that people want to attempt to kind of justify their idols. And so, and St. Paul talks about this, too. All men know that God exists, but they suppress that knowledge. And so there's different ways you can suppress that. But the philosophers build systems, don't they? And they make it super complicated. And then it puts the burden on us that it's like, well, now I've got to learn all this stuff. I've got to learn logic, modal logic, and all this analytic philosophy and epistemology just to cut through all the BS and show you that the problem's not hard at all, but simple, and that's the hardest problem. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, there's this illusion that's cast that makes people think that it's all very, profound and deep and sophisticated. And really the only sophisticated part is when we're addressing the supposed sophisticated arguments of the opponents, but are really just kind of like, smoke and mirrors to cover up total bankruptcy and absolutely no foundations for anything.
And I'm not even sure that most people are aware that they're doing this. And so part of the problem is not being able to see the obvious, is that you've got yourself into a bad program and a bad operating system that doesn't allow you to see kind of clearly and think through stuff. So, the natural theologian et al. Think that, well, we just give people arguments and they'll just see it. But the problem isn't an argument. How are you going to see the proof or the argument when your operating system doesn't allow you to? So
and you also have an inner partial motivation to suppress that truth, right? This is that point about virtue epistemology, virtue knowledge, or virtue ethics that is often ignored by the natural theology proponents, which is ironic because I've asked a lot of them if they think that a person who is an unbeliever and prefers vice, would that in any way maybe affect the evidences that they see and how they interpret the evidences? And most of them will say yes. But then when you really drill down into their approach, they're still acting like, but all I have to do is like pile up evidences and eventually they'll kind of tip over and convince the person to maybe believe.
Now, all that being said, it doesn't prevent me from trying to figure out better ways of cutting through all of that. I mean, it's really hard to kind of do to get yourself out of your own paradigm and think in terms of the other person so that I can come back into the paradigm and then work some of that into my paper. So one of the things that I did was just kind of put an ad out on all this like socials. Give me your best objections. Like, let me see it from your point of view so that I can go back and kind of think through, like, what is it that people are struggling with? How can I answer it? And then again, how to boil down a lot of this really kind of complicated stuff and make it a lot more presentable.